Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for joining this distinguished panel that's going to be discussing a really, really important topic in the next 55 minutes. We are going to be looking at the title of a talk that is called From Hidden Figures to Prominent Leaders, Advancing Women in Africa's Scientific Institutions. And I have four very distinguished panelists. My name is Alex Godwin Coutinho. I am speaking from Kampala, Uganda right now. I've been in global health for close to 30 years, and currently I'm the chair of the International Partnership for Microbicides. I'll ask Quarraisha to introduce herself, and then Yumna, then Tom, and then Catherine.
Thanks, Alex. Greetings, everyone. I'm Quarraisha Abdool Karim, Associate Scientific Director of CAPRISA and also a professor in clinical epidemiology at Columbia University. It's a real pleasure as an infectious diseases epidemiologist to be part of this eminent panel this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Thanks.
Yumna, you're muted. There you go.
My name is Yumna Musa. I'm a medical doctor, a mathematician, and a mother of a small child. And I'm also a PhD student looking at TB transmission in rural KwaZulu-Natal. I'm in Cape Town, South Africa at the moment, next to the ocean. The ocean is that way. And yes, it's a great honor to be part of this panel today. And I look forward to the conversation.
Tom Kariuki, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are joining us from. I'm the Director of Programs at the African Academy of Sciences, so I lead a platform there called the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, and through that platform, we have been building a lot of science, technology, and innovation programs across the continent. I'm delighted to be joining this meeting.
Excellent.
Hi, my name is Catherine Chavtonji. I'm the Executive Director of the African Population and Health Research Center, or APHRC. I'm calling in from Nairobi. My background is in medicine, public health, and epidemiology, and I have research interest in non-communicable diseases and the interface with the health system. And I'm thrilled to be on this panel this afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thanks, Quarraisha, Yumna, Tom, and Catherine. So let me set the scene for some of the questions that we shall be asking the panelists to discuss. So women in Africa play a vital role in contributing to Africa's development and transformation, perhaps the most important role. And yet, women remain substantially underrepresented in higher education and in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the STEM subjects. In fact, only 30% of sub-Saharan researchers in all subject areas are women. In fact, a study by the institute that Tom is affiliated with shows that there are many barriers, systemic and individual barriers for women to progress in this area of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I'm sure we shall hear more about that. And even women who choose to take a career in scientific research often leave at a fairly junior level for various reasons. That could be social, that could be professional, or could be due to harassment or discrimination. And again, we're going to hear quite a bit of that in the questions, which means that as careers of scientists progress, you get more and more men and fewer women. And yet, there are many important issues that women have successfully driven in terms of research and have been driven because women have brought a very important perspective to a scientific question or a scientific problem that others might not have brought about. And so this is the background. It's not a good background. And my first question to the four panelists is, as we now sit in 2020, in the middle of a COVID pandemic, what is the status quo? Quarraisha, I'll begin with you. How would you describe the situation of women in science and in developing a career in science?
Yeah, so sadly, there still remains many challenges. And I think that these challenges are perhaps more pronounced in low and middle income countries. And it's not for the lack of trying. And I think in the past few years or decades, particularly, more emphasis and attention is being paid to it. And I think that there are a number of initiatives, and I'll just mention a few that have really catalyzed some changes on the status quo. And one of those is the L'Oreal UNESCO Laureate Awards and Rising Stars. And as some of you may be aware, just a few days ago, we had the announcement of the 2020 Nobel Prizes in Chemistry. And that was won for the first time by two women, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, who in 2016 were L'Oreal UNESCO recipients. Now, this program in particular recognizes leading scientists from all regions of the world, as opposed to one recipient or two recipients. And this is important because it creates role models. And I think when women can see other women in leadership positions, it gives them more strength and courage and inspiration to follow those paths. So let me stop there and let's hear from others. Thank you.
And I'll be coming back to you, Quarraisha, to talk about your own history and who your role model will, but we'll come back to that. So Yumna, how would you stock take where we are now? What is the status quo? Has anything changed? Are things getting better, or has COVID even made it worse?
So I think COVID in particular, in my experience, has made it worse because it's put us all at home, and at home, women still take the lion's share of domestic responsibilities. If you're putting women in the home and saying, work there, it's a very challenging space. I wouldn't necessarily be able to comment on whether things are getting better or not. I'm still so early in my career, I would argue. But I have a very close relationship with my mother, who is extremely optimistic. And she reminded me in anticipation of this meeting to say, don't be negative. Things are much better for your generation than it was for my generation. So I feel the need to say that my mother can see that things are much better for me than they were for her. And I do think that's true.
Excellent. And I'll come back to Yumna again with your own life story to understand your trajectory and how you got into science. So Tom, your institute is trying to build systems, and we'll hear more about those systems when you go to that in detail. But how would you evaluate where we are today?
Thanks, Alex. I think it's a mixed bag of where we are. So first of all, I'm delighted that I'm joining two women leaders who are very much associated, that I've known them very well for many, many years, Karim and Quarraisha, as they are fellows of the African Academy of Sciences, where I work and where we've been building all this work that trying to bring as many women as we can to bring to the sciences. But on the one hand, therefore, we have very few fellows of the African Academy of Sciences who have been inducted as women leaders in Africa. And unfortunately, that is the kind of things you see in terms of the data you see from across the world for many academies around the world. But on the other hand, I think the good news is that we have a burgeoning pipeline of young researchers, including women, who are looking forward actually to join this new ecosystem that we are trying to build across the continent. And I think what we are trying to do is to be very intentional about what we want to do to get where we want to get in terms of the new generation of young researchers that we want to bring to Africa, and for them to become the emerging leaders that we want to see for the next generation.
And I'm sure Yumna is well on her way to become a fellow as she progresses in her own career and will be a prominent woman leader as well. Catherine, tell us what you think. Do you think we're in a good place, heading to a good place, or going backwards a little bit because of this epidemic or other forces?
I think we're in a good place in terms of the overall trend and the overall picture. But then COVID-19 has brought many other complications, not just to this whole field of women in science, in many other fields. And I've seen papers that say that productivity amongst women has plummeted, in some cases as much as 70%. So if you compare the ratio of women who are publishing papers during the pandemic and you compare them to men, women have just sort of given up on publishing because the dynamics, staying at home, children going to school, online schools, Zoom meetings, and all that. So I think women, because care responsibilities usually fall on them, they've sort of taken a back seat when it comes to publishing papers. That's the general trend I would see, like what the impact of COVID-19 has been. But then on the other hand, there've been some other developments that perhaps could be positive. The fact that we've sort of figured out that it's possible to work from home. And so the question is what that means in future when COVID is no longer there and kids are back to school and women can actually stay at home and work, without the responsibilities for caring for school-going children. That there might actually be an opportunity where women are able to balance better their work life, responsibilities, that they're at home, the baby's there, you can, eat from home, you can see what's going on in the house, and you can still work and be productive. So there are opportunities that might come as a result of COVID-19, but for now, the hugest impact is the inability of women to effectively participate in production, in scientific production.
Excellent. I think those 4 responses really put us into the frame of where we are, but I want us now to take us way, way back. Sometimes when we look at where women are in science, we start when they're entering university. I want to take us back to when girls are 5 years old, girls and boys are 5 years old. That journey from 5 to 18, are we doing that journey right? Are there things we should change? Should we be getting Quarraisha and Yumna and Catherine to go out to schools to talk about science and be these role models? What happens that changes or influences young girls, and I'm calling them girls because 5 to 12 to 15, they're still girls and then become young women. This is a general question. And again, I'd like each one of you to give us some ideas about how we could change it all the way back to 5 years, even as we're going to talk about those who are already in the field of science. And again, I'll ask Quarraisha, would you like to kick off?
Thanks, Alex. And I think I could spend a whole day on this, and I know we just have a few minutes. So I'll make a few points. The first is that, this is the 21st century, and women make up half the world. And if we want women in the workplace and playing a leadership role, it's not about what women do or don't do, but it starts even before 5, and it's about shared parental responsibilities. And I'm saying it because I'm also a mother, although my kids are probably like as old as Yumna, that both my husband and I are scientists. And it is because we've had shared parental responsibilities that we're able to flourish and be both leaders in science. But I want to go back to my own upbringing. And again, it goes to parenting. And my parents and grandparents were a very big influence. And Nelson Mandela is often quoted as saying, education is the greatest equalizer. And I bear testimony to that. My parents never went to university, never even finished high school. And in any other setting, I could be a sort of labor-intensive worker, blue-collar worker. But because they put so much emphasis on education and encouraging us to find our talent, find our passion, and it didn't matter what it was. In my case, it happened to be science and being supported, and then having good teachers in school. And then as you get into university and postgraduate work, the mentors all supplemented, but it's that early foundational work where there's no replacements for parents. And, as scientists, for example, kids are born curious. And it pains me every time I watch an adult stopping the curiosity of a child, because that's the death knell. If you want scientists, you've got to nurture that curiosity. You've got to give young kids the space to explore and discover things. And that's how, you nurture kids to have confidence and assurance, regardless of where you are, because I've seen that in really, really poor households where that is an important trait of support. You see kids flourishing. Thanks.
Thanks, Quarraisha. What would you add to that?
Well, I just love the point about the value of nurturing curiosity and exploration early on, because so my child's 2.5, so I have to go shopping for boys' clothes and girls' clothes. And boys' clothes say things like explorer, adventurer, see the world, you're the machines, little scientist. And girls' clothes say cute. I'm going to grow up to, everyone's going to love me, pink flowers, let me hang out with my friends. We are, from so young, training women to be social, friendly, attractive, beautiful creatures. And we're training boys and men to go out and do and be and explore. And then I don't think it's surprising that 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, you have different outputs and different, we've learned to be different. And that has been consistent with I went to an all-girls high school. I've always been good at mathematics. And in our A class, so grade 10, you have to choose subjects. In our leading mathematics class, they were discouraging people from doing higher grade maths if they wouldn't be able to cope with it. This was a Model C school, top class. This is what they were telling girls. So I think there's a lot of new ways and different ways that we need to deal with our young people if we want different consequences.
Thanks very much, Yumna. Tom, you're muted, so you have to unmute. What do you think about this, the investments we need to make much earlier on?
I think first to say that, I'm a very proud father of daughters, and I think I would like to believe that my daughters have made their choices and that they have had the opportunities to become whatever they want to become. And I wish we could see that every family in Africa provides that kind of opportunities. And I think we know that we are struggling with early age girl child with assumptions that girls can do this or cannot do that. And that's one of the things that we are trying to really begin to address, particularly to make sure that there is this thought that needs to be dismissed that, for example, that for whatever biological factors, and they do not exist, of course, we know that all of us as human beings can actually be the best we can be in the STEM sciences, generally speaking. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in terms of what we want to do. We did a recent survey, Alex, and one of the things we did was to ask 400 women across the continent on what they thought about the factors which can contribute or which inhibit women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM. And I think we looked at how they are being recruited on merit. And we find, for example, that 90% of the 400 women that we surveyed actually agrees that there are challenges in terms of recruitment, whether it is getting into university, whether it is issues to do with mentorship that they need for them to become in their own career progression to go forward. We find that there are still a lot of beliefs and attitudes that are rampant across our cultures and societies. So 60% of the women that we surveyed in this report said, for example, men in STEM have more career opportunities than women. And that is a data that we have from a 400 survey, which speaks to the potential challenges of beliefs of men being favored in the workplace, for example, attitudes, for example, because women, when somebody is doing an interview to recruit somebody to the work office, they will start thinking that maybe I might recruit this woman and she might have to go off because she has pregnancy within the first 6 months of being on the office, or maybe they have family and children burdens. Are they bringing those to the office? So this kind of biases, unconscious biases are part of the challenges that we see. And then we are hearing from our report, for example, that sexual harassment is also is a problem. It is not as a big problem as we thought it would be. I know it is a major problem, but we found that actually about 12% of people of the 400, 12% said actually, yes, they have encountered aspects of sexual harassment during recruitment or promotion within the systems that they are working in. And then, of course, there is the whole question around, women having to prove themselves every time, whether it is within an institution, a university, a research institution. Again, we've found that 60% of the people we surveyed actually say that they constantly need to prove themselves that they are as capable as men, while nearly 80% of the women deal with the obstacles that men don't seem to appreciate. And I think that's a part of the problem, is that there is this lack of appreciation, that we need to then address these questions around false perceptions and their suitability to be a scientist, and everybody making sure that the champions and mentors are actually using the right language when they are dealing with young women who go to them seeking for support. My initial thoughts on that.
Thanks, Tom. And we're going to do a deep dive on that just now. Let's ask Catherine just to give her views on that very early stage and how we even socialize girls not to aspire for STEM subjects.
Yes, I think maybe most of the speakers have touched on this. I grew up in a family of 7, and my parents were similar perhaps to Quarraisha's parents, that they were not very highly educated. But in retrospect, when I look back in their generation, my parents didn't discriminate between boys and girls. We all had the same opportunities. It was just your innate abilities that took you to the school that you chose to, but there was nothing like, oh, you can do this and you can't do that. And I've said this several times, in many interviews. I was young and I would go to primary school and I would come back and complain to my dad that this boy did this boy did this boy did that. And he told me, I might have been maybe 5 or 6, and he said, anything a boy can do, a girl can do. And for me, I don't know when it occurred to me that actually that was something that he said to me, and how it shaped personally my whole career trajectory. But it's something that stayed with me. Even as a teenager, I did things that were boy things and all that. But then in school, in primary school, math was a thing for boys. But somehow I look back and I feel like maybe I was unstoppable and the teachers couldn't keep me down. And so I thrived doing math in primary school and secondary school and all that. But anyone else who was not unstoppable perhaps gave up, because you are the abnormal one that you liked math and you are a girl. I have a 10-year-old daughter as well, and we've been having all these arguments when she has homework. Oh, math is hard, it's hard, it's hard. And I have to keep on saying it's not hard, because this is how it is. And recently she told me that one of the things I've taught her is that math is not hard. And I'm like, okay, we might get somewhere with this one. And I relate also to what Yumna said. When I was in high school, I mean, Alex, you'd be familiar with the Ugandan system, that we're supposed to do 3 principles in high school. So you had to pick 3 subjects, and then what they call a subsidiary. I liked math very much, and I insisted I want to do principal math. So I did physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. And that was 4 principles, and everybody thought I was crazy. And I remember when the headmistress calling me in her office and said, you're confused, you have to make up your mind, choose 3 subjects, you're going to fail. I'm like, can't you? I look back and it's like, can't you support me and to follow my dream? Why are you telling me I'm going to fail? In the end, I didn't fail. I had so many options. I could have been an engineer, I could have been an architect, I could have been a doctor. I ended up being a doctor, but I could have done anything I wanted to, because I didn't sort of give up on my dream. But still, I think it goes back to the fact that perhaps I was unstoppable and anyone else could have given up. So there are structural systems, the education systems, the teachers, the socialization, but of course, a lot of these things are also happening in the homes. And so parents have a role to play in how they socialize girls, but then also the environment in which the girls get exposed to, right from primary school, also has a role.
Excellent. As a take-home message for the audience, what I have learned is that good parenting is as essential as any other input to get good female scientists. And, there's no school for parents, unfortunately. It's a bit of hit and miss sometimes. And maybe we need to look at how parents themselves learn how to be good parents. So let's take a bit of a deep dive in an area that, Tom touched on. And this is that once women decide to take a career in science, doing their first degree or their master's degree or their PhD, or, take on a full career in science, there are many obstacles that are systemic. Some are very direct and personal, like sexual harassment, like toxic environments. So Yumna, you had volunteered to share a little bit about what you have gone through in your own career and perhaps you are closest to that stage compared to the other participants who are on, other panelists. Would you mind sharing a little bit about some of these obstacles you might have encountered and ways in which you overcame those?
So let me start by agreeing that these things, these hierarchies, racism, sexism, othering is everywhere. And during my internship, I experienced it. I came into the world and I came into the working world, and I realized that the world is toxic and the world doesn't treat Black women well, among other people. But initially, I wasn't a particular victim of it until I had this interesting experience where I gave feedback in a logbook. I wrote down at the end of my internship saying that there were some problems. And then a powerful thing happened. My colleagues, my seniors, my employers, the Health Professional Council of South Africa all tried to silence me. And there were a number of people who tried to stop me from qualifying as a doctor. And I had to fight this battle for 2 years. And it sounds crazy. It was so dramatic. And I wouldn't have even believed that it happened if I didn't have audio recordings of some of these meetings that I was in. And it was really, really bizarre. And what it showed me is that there are these structures that are just so pervasive and so resistant to change. And I did manage to stubbornly fight it and navigate my way out. I am now a qualified doctor. Thank you to all the people who made that happen. But yeah, it was heartbreaking, and it destroyed my naivete. Yeah, that's what happened.
But hopefully you're in a good place now, and you're on this panel. Thank you very much.
I'm in a much better place now.
Thank you for being willing to share these experiences, because I know I've encountered similar things, but perhaps nowhere near what you've encountered. And they leave a mark on you. They leave a mark on you, and they eat up your self-esteem. You start questioning whether you're good enough, and you have to put a lot of energy in overcoming that. So thank you again for sharing that. Quarraisha, I'll switch over to you, because you continue to have an illustrious career. You're a professor. You have published over 200 publications. You are respected globally. So how did you stay the course when I'm sure there were quite a number of your classmates who kept falling out? And yet you're a mother as well. You've raised children. You've had many other responsibilities. What's the secret?
I'm not sure it's a secret, but maybe it is, growing up in apartheid South Africa, people of color were dehumanized. And I wasn't going to let a government or a system decide whether I'm a human being or not. And I think these constant battles that you have to face, and I think a few people mentioned this, you find more people dissuading you from your dreams than actually supporting you. And you have to look really hard to find those few people who are going to support you no matter what. And I think each time I have encountered a challenge, it has made me stronger. Every time somebody tells me, no, you cannot do this, it makes me even more compelled to do it and show this. And I think every battle that I have fought has left me more resilient. And it's not like now I'm 60 and I never meet any challenges. I still sit in meetings with really top leaders, and I get shouted on, I get insulted, and I can't let that detract me from what it is I want to do and how I want to contribute. And I think, it's tough sometimes, and it's also, as Yumna said, when you get into trouble and you're facing some of these challenges, you're alone, and you got to either sink or swim. And I think, as I said, I think growing up in apartheid South Africa had a lot to do with this. being an anti-apartheid activist. And I think adversity has become part of my DNA. And I'm sorry to say to some of the younger people on this panel that it's not an easy road, but that's not a reason why you shouldn't persist. In fact, just keep going, keep trying, and just keep moving forward. So every time you have a negative encounter, I like to look at it, and I'm sure Yumna can testify to this, it makes you stronger and it makes you more resilient, and you keep going.
Okay, excellent. Catherine. Thank you, Quarraisha. Thank you. Catherine, you are an executive director of a very important organization in Africa. I'm interested, first, the challenges you might have faced in being chosen as a woman to be an executive director when most executive directors are men. And when you sit with your peers, do you still encounter people who question whether you should be an executive director?
It's an interesting question because I was in the system. I wasn't an outsider to the African Population and Health Research Center, and I had been part of senior management for quite some time. But then it was still a huge, I don't even know how to say, when my predecessor resigned, I couldn't sleep for 3 days because I imagined that it was going to be like a disaster. And so my journey to become the executive director is an interesting one. I don't think I can tell the whole story. But in the end, the biggest challenge actually was with myself, if I could say that. And at some point, I encountered a phrase that leadership is a mastery of self. So my biggest challenge was to master myself, understand who I am, the person that I thought I was, and the person that I was not being perceived to be, and figuring out the person that I knew that I was, and going back to that space where I was a much more patient, understanding, caring, respectful person, and then figuring out my own health and my own sanity, and that as a leader you have to be sane, you have to be okay. So those were huge challenges because it was a shift from like 16 hours nonstop for maybe 10 years, and then figuring out you need a rest, you need to take a break, you need to be sane, you need to be there for the institution, because the institution sort of depends on your being there. So my biggest challenges actually were that, like going back to the place where I felt I was a nice human being and being happy with the person I was, and then trying to see how that was reflected in the institutional culture. So the challenge is about maybe what I would call resistance initially to my appointment really stemmed from me, the person, not necessarily because I was a woman. It was me, the person that I had become as a result of the challenges and stresses of leadership. So it was a journey of reflection and self-discovery and figuring out that I'm in a good place, I'm happy with who I am, I'm happy with what I'm doing. And the rest, we wait to see the results. And if the results are good, then hopefully we're bringing everyone along, into this journey. Yeah.
Thank you. Catherine, you raised two issues which we don't have time to explore, but they're really, really important. I'll mention them so that the audience can think about them. One is the transition that scientists, whether men or women, have to make into leadership. Because as you grow in your career, you are leading institutions, you are leading groups of people, and the skill sets you learned as a scientist are not necessarily the same skill sets as being a leader. And the challenges that women leaders face compared to male leaders may be different. So this is, again, is another area that needs to be unpacked. And you also bring up this whole issue about when you are a woman, a female scientist or a female leader, who are the people you can turn to for counseling, for giving you feedback so that you can look after yourself and be in a good state? So we can't tackle that in this short time, but I wanted to take those important pieces out. Tom, you and I are men. I think we look like men. Are we part of the problem? Is it changing? Do you think we are getting more men? And I would hope you and me are one of those who are allies, who understand many of these issues, are willing to learn, because I'm sure even I continue making these kind of mistakes and assumptions, so that we become allies for this process of building both the pipeline, but also encouraging female scientists to really get into their careers and flourish.
So, Alex, I refuse to speak on behalf of all the men, but I can speak about this one man who can try what he can do. I think I have had the opportunity in the last 5 years to really think about how we can change science, technology, and innovation in Africa. I think what I learned very early on in my current job at the African Academy of Sciences is that we have to start by looking at the kind of policies that we require of institutions and our grantees that are receiving, some of them receiving millions of dollars that we are putting out to various institutions with our partners. We started by looking at what kind of policies do we need to have in place. And one is to be very intentional about where we want to arrive, what sort of indicators that we are going to be capturing from the various reports that we are receiving from our grantees and institutions. And one is to say, we want to see attainment of 50-50 gender parity in recruitment of students, for example, whether they are coming in for their postdoctoral opportunities in an institution. And are we providing them, and is the institution providing them with the right kind of policies, whether it could be addressing the research culture at the institution, at every institution, that we support maternal and paternity policies. We are addressing issues around bullying and harassment that we know have become emergent in some institutions. We are safeguarding, we are dealing with gender sensitive human resources policies. We pay women for what they need to be paid equal to the men. So that's an aspect. The other one is around the whole area around change perceptions. And our reports show that we have a long way to go in changing perceptions about gender and how that should be limited or not limited in the workplace, and how that then translates from the workplace to the home. And I think we're trying to get institutions to create gendered workplaces for women so that they can go back to the societies that they are more empowered about. And we also begin to address this issue around the gender stereotypes and the barriers that we need to overcome for them to really overcome. So there are all these patriarchal attitudes that we inhibit women to get into STEM sciences. Decision making still very much is the preserve of men in most positions, whether you look at a board composition or whether you look at the university level, where you're looking at the councils of the universities. Decision making is very much predominantly being dominated by men. How do we get there? What about remuneration? So we want to address that. So when we recruit people using our grants and we put them out into institutions, we want to see that qualifications, remuneration are also addressing gender inequities so that it is being advanced over the years, that they actually become just from moving from students to become people who get into a position in whether they are the assistant lecturer or all the way to going to the professorship. So it's about creating opportunities for males also, so that we as men, our colleagues in the science, learn how to listen and to hear more what the women want in terms of women leadership, women as peers. How do we become champions ourselves as men for policies that promote the gender working environment? How do we even celebrate women leaders? We don't celebrate women leaders as we should be celebrating women leaders. And I said, for example, for the African Academy of Sciences, even though we have 500 fellows like Catherine and Quarraisha, only about 100 out of those 500, only about 100 of them are actually women leaders. So we have a long way to go to get to this so-called parity and equity and inequity that we need to pursue. And that's back to you, Alex. It's a big job for me and you and all the men who need to just step up a little bit more than we have stepped up.
Absolutely. I think for me, the turning point is being raised in Uganda in a very traditional sense with a lot of male privilege is when I got my daughter. Because suddenly I could put myself in her shoes and what she wanted to be and whether the world around was ready for her. She's 30 now, and that was a change, a lot of change in my mindset. Quarraisha, let's shift gears now. you and I, many years ago, were on the same board, engaged in supporting research for female-controlled products. Do you think that having more women in science will focus the efforts in science and the grants that are available for the kinds of technologies that are most useful to women? And can you give a few examples of those technologies for our audience that perhaps would not have been promoted if it hadn't been women pushing for them?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Those take me back to some fond memories, our common board membership. And I think here, I think about my own career trajectory and identification of the burden of HIV infection in women, and particularly in young women, 15 to 24 years, and everything that was happening in the global community. I mean, HIV is the other, I call pandemic. Right now, we're all very focused on COVID-19. But in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the research was about what do men need, and particularly men who have sex with men. And yet there was a heterosexual generalized epidemic just flourishing in Africa. And as an epidemiologist, I did one of the first studies that actually demonstrated this age-sex disparate relationships. And I remember at that time, we respected the academic embargoes against apartheid South Africa. And I submitted this paper showing this age-sex difference to the South African Medical Journal. And this was, at the time, some of the unbanning and changes in South Africa was starting to happen, and that paper was rejected. And I then sent it to the journal AIDS, and it was accepted for fast track. So it shows sometimes how the peer review system doesn't always function as well as it should. But that was, that work around age-sex differences, it took nearly 25 years before it became widely accepted as there's a huge burden of infection, women are vulnerable, and there are no women-controlled technologies. So where you have gender power differences, how can you expect the victim or the least empowered and the more vulnerable person to take charge of her life and be uninfected? So that was the impetus for that work. And I can tell you that if I had not looked at that data like the way I had, if many others didn't join in that struggle, and this is largely women-led, whether it's in the US or Europe or Africa or Asia, we would still be sitting with this data gap in terms of women-initiated technologies. And thankfully today we have a lot more options. But women are a diverse group, and it's not a single need that they have. Their needs change across their life course, and what may work for one woman may not. And it's the same with men. You can't have Viagra as the solution for erectile dysfunction. You have a whole range of things. And yet when it comes to women, we want it to be like a single magic bullet. That's your investment. That's our investment done if the investment is actually made. And I think in life sciences, we see these huge gaps. In Africa, women bear many burdens, and health is one of them, and poor health. And so if women and women scientists don't take the lead to find solutions, we'll be sitting here with the same problems and same challenges 20 years from now. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Great. So we have 10 minutes, and we are getting a number of questions from the audience. So I will allocate those questions sort of randomly. Yumna, I'll start with you. We've talked about the situation and the challenges, but now I want to hear a forward-looking. What do we need to do different? What are some of the things that we can do now that will change the current status, especially given that the COVID epidemic will be with us for a little while? Yes.
Well, one of the things that I think would be very helpful is for us to change our approach to, I don't know if you can hear my child scream in the background, sorry. To change our approach to criticism or protest. And when people protest, to say, thank you for your input, thank you for your feedback, thank you for caring enough to say something. And then as leaders, to, as I think Quarraisha was talking about, to support the vulnerable, be the vulnerable, the young or the old or the poor or women or whatever, to be part of solving the problems that we all face rather than treating us like the problems to be solved. Because I think if we were all working together on these things, to be not feeling like it's happening to us, but like we've got choices, then that would move things forward. So this was informed by my particular experience as well, and I think it aligns very nicely to the story about the patient or the women-controlled technologies. I think that's what we think.
Excellent. Catherine, and this is another question that's coming from the audience. I'll change it a little bit. Well, you are now executive director of an important institute. What measures are you now putting in place in your institute to advance other women, both in your institute and maybe partner institutes, to advance more women to be in a leadership position so that you are not the last female executive director of this particular institution, so to speak?
Oh, wow. I could speak for an hour about some of the things that we're doing, but I'll just try to be brief. So we have a monitoring system, and many times to the board every year we present, yes, there are how many women, this percentage and this, that. But then it occurred to me that we keep on presenting numbers, but so what? And so we started digging up on the numbers, and we realized that we had gender parity over time, but then the gender parity was because we had more women at the junior levels compared to the mid-level and the senior levels. So it's a question, because it's not enough to say these are our percentages. So we've put in place measures to see, okay, how do we advance? How do we support women? How do we help them grow in their careers? So there are policies, Tom talked about the safeguarding and the sexual harassment policies. We are trying to tighten them and make it extremely clear that we have zero tolerance for any kind of harassment in the workplace. And so those are some of the things. So the policies are there, the measurement is there. When you see what the measurement tells you, so what, do something about that. We are also putting in place some things in the workplace itself. Of course, there are the flexi time when people have just had babies, the maternity leave. We have a breastfeeding room, so women can come with their pump, and there's a small fridge they can store their breast milk so they can go home and give their babies. And we've just finished the creche. If COVID hadn't come, our creche would be active. If your nanny decides to bolt on you early in the morning, you can bring your baby, we'll provide care for that. So it's really to make it possible for women to pursue both their responsibilities as women and as members of families, but also to support them to do their careers. Now, outside our institution, we lead a program that Tom would be familiar with, trying to promote the training of women into PhD programs. And we've put in place very specific policies to make it possible for them to enroll in the first instance, and then to participate effectively in that training program. It's called CATA. So the age cutoff is different. We provide childcare support for them to travel with the childminder and their babies and all this. And it has been quite amazing, because more than 40 women actually have used this facility. And many times you ask yourself, this is somebody who would have maybe given up on attending a conference or attending a training in their PhD, but it's making that possible. So very many things that we're putting in place to build the pipeline, but also to support it to grow.
Excellent. So Tom, and this will have to be brief because I'll then ask Quarraisha to sort of round up the last question. Tom, how high up must we go to make change? To make change in policies, to make change in the systems that might be impeding the development of female scientists, or science in general, but specifically female scientists?
I think we would want to go as far, as high up as we can go, and I think it's not about women being pulled up. No, it's about them taking their place, because they deserve to be at the highest levels. They deserve to be sitting where they should be sitting as leaders. So this power.
Sorry to interrupt. I meant, do we need to go to the president or the prime minister or parliament? How high do we need to go to effect change?
Yeah, it helps with policies. Yeah, I agree with what Catherine has said. I think it helps with policies at the right level. But of course, I think it is very clear that women has led a very major changes across the world for centuries by taking this on board, but then being supported by all people of goodwill who want to see that humanity is humanity and all lives and all gender matter. And therefore, that has been transformation to get where we are, whether it is getting women to vote or getting the empowerment over the decades. I think we've made progress, but I think we all need to have this concerted approach that we need to do to get to the level. Unfortunately, when I have my own discussions with my good friends and I ask them, so why are you hesitant to get into this career in sciences, for example, or get into political sciences or something else? And they say, well, the challenges are too much. And I think we just have to keep addressing those questions to say, no, actually, there are good mentors who can actually help. There are champions who can actually hold your hand. And there are policies that might be in place for you to get where you want to get. And we need to be very important. So we want, at the African Academy of Sciences, we want to move from just making recommendations, and Catherine said very well, moving beyond just recommendations, having policies to actually making sure that it is a statutory requirement for you to actually meet those requirements. And the last thing I would say is that there is an opportunity for us to work together and leapfrog some of the challenges we have seen all over the place, and overcoming some of the cultural inhibitions. Maybe takes a bit of work, but we can do it. It can be done, and I am very optimistic about what we can do when we all get together, moving in the right direction.
Quarraisha, this is the last question, and about 1 minute only. So, today, as you are sort of at the apex of your career, how much time do you actually have on a day-to-day basis to do mentoring, to give motivational speeches to scientists generally, but particularly female scientists? And do you think that this is an obligation for female scientists who are accomplished to do so as to motivate more of the younger generation to come up?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I spend about half of my day doing mentoring and motivational talks. But I want to just underscore two things. The one is that the session is about science in Africa, and particularly that. And the unique characteristic of Africa is that it has a demographic dividend in its young people. And I'm really so excited that we have Yumna on this panel, because I think what we're seeing in Africa is very, very exciting, is that young people know, because of the new communication platforms, social media, and Google, and so on, access to information is no longer the barrier between Africa and the rest of the world. And young people are seizing that, both young men and women, and having them being their own voices, I think, is something that's going to really shake things up. And so we have to think about non-traditional things, and we can wait for governments to do things, and we'll be waiting a long time. But I think that when I see what young people themselves are doing, being the architects of their own destiny, I have immense hope in Africa, and Africa realizing her full potential globally and addressing the challenges it faces.
Great. Thanks, Quarraisha. And then on that optimistic note, we do need to close. We have just about a minute. I want to thank Quarraisha and Yumna and Catherine and Tom for providing not just the experience, but their personal stories. Very inspiring. And this is a struggle and a commitment that is going to have to continue for many years. I've just got 2 granddaughters now. One was born 4 weeks ago. So every time I see my granddaughters, I try to imagine what they will be in the future. And I hope that all these good things that we have said will be in place for them to thrive, whether they do choose to take STEM or they don't. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the backup team that has enabled this session to go very smoothly. Bye-bye.